Welcome to Inner Compass, Navigating Life's Crossroads, your space for stories about the intricate journeys of the heart and mind, the quiet battles fought within, and the courageous steps taken towards healing and self-understanding. If you're on a path of self-discovery or seeking to understand the delicate complexities of human connection, please subscribe and click the bell for notifications. We believe these stories can offer comfort and insight. Today, we're sharing a very intimate and beautifully honest story about a woman who felt herself fading in her own life and the unexpected, perhaps complicated therapeutic relationship that helped her find her way back to herself and possibly offered a new path for her marriage. Before we begin, we'd like to ask you, have you ever felt truly unseen or unheard by someone you deeply love? How did that silence impact you? Share your experiences respectfully in the comments below. Now, let us join Lena on her journey. I never imagined, not even in my bleakest moments, hearing those words come from my husband's mouth. The story, however, started with silence. Not the kind that feels peaceful or meditative, the comfortable quiet between two people who know each other's souls. No, this was the other kind, the insidious kind that creeps in, uninvited, and settles like a chilling fog between people who used to talk about everything. I, Lena, first noticed it in the way Mark, my husband, no longer looked up from his phone when I entered the room. We used to laugh over breakfast at our little kitchen table in Denver, Colorado, text each other silly, ridiculous memes throughout the workday, and playfully argue over which movie to watch on a Friday night. But now, even the simplest small talk had withered and vanished, replaced by quiet, almost mechanical meals and perfunctory good nights. We had been married for 7 years, and our bright, bubbly 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, was the one precious string that still, somehow, tied our interactions together. Every conversation, it seemed, revolved around her, what she ate, what new outfit she insisted on wearing, how her day at preschool had been. Outside of our shared roles as parents, I felt like Mark and I had slowly, painfully, become strangers occupying the same living space. I wasn't entirely sure when, or even how, the profound change began. Maybe it was after Sophie was born, when the sheer, unrelenting exhaustion of new parenthood made romantic gestures and intimate conversations feel like impossible luxuries. Maybe it was when Mark started staying late at his demanding engineering job more and more often, or perhaps when I simply stopped trying to dress up just to stay at home, feeling unseen anyway. It wasn't necessarily anyone's fault. Life, with its relentless demands and subtle erosions, had just taken over. Still, I missed being seen. I missed being truly seen. It was a crisp Wednesday morning when my friend, Jessica, first mentioned therapy. We were sitting at a cozy neighborhood cafe, sipping lattes, watching our kids chase each other with joyful abandon around the small, sun-drenched play area. "You should really try it, Lena," Jessica said gently, her eyes kind. "I started seeing someone a few months ago, just talking to someone completely neutral, someone outside of it all, made me feel like I could finally breathe again." I laughed, a short, awkward sound. "Oh, I don't know, Jess. It just seems, I don't know, indulgent, almost selfish." Jessica shook her head, a knowing look on her face. "Not when your heart feels like it's slowly shrinking, Lena. Just go once. If it doesn't help, you don't have to go again. What have you got to lose?" Later that night, long after putting Sophie to bed, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, listlessly brushing my hair. I glanced at my reflection. Tired eyes stared back at me, a faded sweatshirt that had seen better days, and the faintest, almost imperceptible, hint of frown lines etching themselves at the corners of my mouth. I hadn't noticed those before, or maybe I had, and had simply stopped caring enough to register them. With a sigh, I opened my phone and on impulse typed "therapist near me" into the search bar. The name that caught my eye, almost immediately, was Dr. Ethan Reed, Individual and Couples Therapy. His online reviews were filled with words like empathetic, insightful, understanding, and professional. Feeling a strange mix of trepidation and a nascent flicker of hope, I booked a session for the following Tuesday.
The first time I met Dr. Reed, Ethan as he quickly invited me to call him, I felt oddly, uncharacteristically nervous. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, wearing a light blue Oxford shirt, sleeves casually rolled up, his expression warm and welcoming but not overly familiar. The office itself smelled faintly of lavender and was decorated in a calming palette of creams and soft grays. There was a well-stocked bookshelf, a plush-looking couch, and a thriving potted fern by the window that caught the afternoon sun. "Call me Ethan," he said, offering a reassuring smile as he gestured for me to sit. "This space is yours, Lena. A place for you to explore whatever you need to." I wasn't sure where to begin. I felt an overwhelming urge to cry, but I managed to hold it back. Instead, I started talking, haltingly at first, then with increasing freedom, about the pervasive loneliness, the bone-deep exhaustion, the suffocating way I often felt invisible, even in my own home. Ethan didn't interrupt. He nodded thoughtfully, sometimes asked a gentle, probing question, but mostly, he just listened. Not in the distracted, half-present way Mark sometimes did, but fully, intently, as if my words, my jumbled feelings, truly mattered. After 50 minutes, the session ended. I stepped outside into the bright afternoon sunlight, blinking against its sudden intensity. Something inside me, some tightly wound knot, felt discernibly lighter. I didn't tell Mark about the sessions. Every Tuesday afternoon became my sacred, unspoken ritual. I'd drop Sophie off at preschool, head to Ethan's quiet, calming office, and spend an hour carefully peeling back the protective layers I'd unknowingly built around myself over the years. He asked about my childhood, my unfulfilled dreams, the simple things I missed doing just for myself. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to remember who I was before I became just Mom or Mark's wife. I started writing again, small, tentative pieces at first, journal entries, half-formed poems. One afternoon, my heart pounding, I read one of them aloud to Ethan. He said it was beautiful. No one had called my work, any part of me, beautiful in years. Over time, our conversations grew deeper, more nuanced. Ethan remained impeccably professional, never once crossing any inappropriate boundaries. But I couldn't deny the genuine sense of anticipation I felt as Tuesdays approached. He remembered the smallest things I said in passing, almost throwaway comments, like how I loved the smell of fresh rain on dry earth, or that my favorite flower, a detail I'd almost forgotten myself, was jasmine. I noticed the way his eyes would soften almost imperceptibly when he listened intently, the way his voice seemed to drop just a fraction when he said my name. I knew, rationally, that it wasn't supposed to mean anything. He was my therapist. This was his job. But I couldn't help the little flutter, the unexpected warmth I felt when he smiled at me. Meanwhile, things at home showed no signs of improvement. Mark seemed even more distant, more preoccupied. He'd come home late from the office, eat dinner with minimal conversation, and then bury himself in emails until bedtime. When I once tentatively asked if he was okay, if something was wrong, he'd replied curtly, "I'm just tired, Lena. It's nothing." I stopped asking after that. One weekend, we took Sophie to a sprawling park just outside Denver. I watched as other couples laughed together easily, snapped selfies, held hands. I felt that familiar, dull ache constrict my chest, the one that whispered insidiously, "You're alone, Lena, even when someone is right beside you." Later that night, after Sophie was sound asleep, I tried talking to Mark again, summoning all my courage. I told him I felt like we were drifting apart, that I missed us, the us we used to be. He looked at me for a long, unreadable moment, then said, his voice flat, "You're overthinking things, Lena. We're fine. Everyone goes through phases like this." But I didn't feel fine. I felt like I was fading, becoming a ghost in my own life. During my 8th session with Ethan, I finally voiced the fear that had been consuming me. "I think I'm falling apart," I whispered, the admission costing me dearly. And Mark, I don't think he even sees it. Ethan didn't respond right away. He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful, contemplative. "Lena," he finally said, his voice gentle, "what do you need most right now?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken emotions. "Kindness," I said after a long pause, the word escaping me like a sigh. "Understanding, to be chosen, even just for a moment." He nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. "You deserve that, Lena. Not just for a moment, but always." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a declaration. But something profound, something indefinable, shifted in the silence that followed. I left his office that day with my heart pounding a wild, unfamiliar rhythm. Lena is navigating such a difficult and emotionally charged space, finding solace and a sense of being seen in her therapy sessions, while the distance in her marriage grows. It's a complex situation many can relate to, that search for connection and understanding. If Lena's story is moving you, or if you've ever found yourself at such a crossroads, please consider liking this video and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your insights enrich our community. And don't forget to subscribe to Inner Compass for more stories that delve into the heart of human experience. Now let's return to Lena as her journey takes another turn. Over the next few weeks, I found myself watching the clock on Tuesdays with an almost feverish anticipation. My sessions with Ethan felt more personal now, imbued with a deeper resonance. Sometimes Ethan would share a carefully chosen anecdote from his own life, always relevant, always offered with the intention of illustrating a point or offering a different perspective. He talked about grief, about the arduous process of healing, about how people can lose themselves and, with courage and support, find their way back again. One afternoon, after a particularly intense session that left me feeling emotionally raw and vulnerable, Ethan walked me to the door, as he always did. Our fingers brushed accidentally as he handed me the appointment receipt. For a fleeting second, neither of us moved. I looked up, meeting his gaze. It was steady, professional, yet there was something else in it too, an awareness perhaps, or a carefully maintained restraint. "Take care of yourself, Lena," he said softly, his voice unusually gentle. I simply nodded, unable to find my own voice, and walked away. My heart didn't stop racing until I reached the safety of my car. At home, Mark barely looked up from his laptop when I walked in. Sophie, however, came running, throwing her arms around my legs with an exuberant hug. "Mommy, I drew you something special," she exclaimed, her eyes shining. I smiled, genuinely smiled, and bent to pick up my daughter. I held her tightly, burying my face in her soft, sweet-smelling curls, anchoring myself to her unconditional love. But later that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I sat alone on the small balcony overlooking the glittering Denver city lights, my phone clutched in my hand. I thought about texting Ethan, just a simple thank you for the session, or maybe a line from the poem I'd tentatively started writing that morning. Instead, I opened my journal and wrote, the words flowing almost on their own. "There's a fine line between healing and needing. I don't know when or if I crossed it." I didn't sleep much that night. I woke up the next morning with a strange, persistent sense of unease. It wasn't fear, exactly, nor was it guilt, but rather a disquieting feeling, as if I were standing on the precarious edge of something significant and didn't know which way to lean. I moved through the morning routine mechanically, getting Sophie ready for preschool, packing her small lunchbox with her favorite snacks, patiently tying her shoelaces while listening to her animated chatter about story time and puzzles. Mark was already gone by the time I entered the kitchen. He'd left early again for a site visit. No note, no message, just more silence. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, the early morning sunlight streaking across the wooden floor. My journal lay open beside me, yesterday's raw, honest words staring back from the page. There's a fine line between healing and needing. I don't know when or if I crossed it.
The sessions with Ethan had undoubtedly become the brightest, most anticipated part of my week. What had begun as conventional therapy, a lifeline in a sea of loneliness, now felt like something else. It wasn't physical. It hadn't even come close to crossing that indelible boundary. But emotionally, I knew. I leaned on him, trusted him with my innermost thoughts and fears more than anyone else in my life. I missed him, his presence, his quiet understanding, when the week stretched too long between our Tuesday appointments. I thought about canceling, about pulling back, about creating some distance. But the thought of losing that unique space, that cherished version of myself that seemed to emerge only in his presence, was almost unbearable. So I didn't cancel. That Tuesday, I found myself taking a little more care with my appearance. I wore my hair down and chose a silk scarf patterned with tiny, delicate jasmine flowers, his favorite, a detail he'd once mentioned in passing during a discussion about sensory memories. I told myself it was silly, that it didn't mean anything. But the way Ethan smiled when I walked into his office, his gaze pausing for just a fraction of a second longer than usual, told me that maybe, just maybe, he noticed too. "How has your week been, Lena?" he asked, his voice calm and inviting as always. I hesitated. "Strange," I finally admitted. "I keep feeling like I'm pretending, even when I'm not." He tilted his head slightly, a gesture of gentle inquiry. "Pretending how?" Like I'm functioning, doing everything I'm supposed to do, work, parenting, household chores. But inside, I'm just tired. Not sleepy tired, but soul tired, as if I've been single-handedly holding up the sky for far too long. He nodded slowly, his expression full of understanding. "That makes perfect sense, Lena. When you carry everything alone, even the lightest burdens can feel incredibly heavy over time." I looked at him then, really looked. And for the first time, I didn't filter my expression, didn't try to mask the vulnerability I felt. He didn't look away. Neither of us said it, the words that hung unspoken in the air between us. But something profound, something deeply significant, passed between us in that shared gaze. Not words, not declarations, just a quiet, resonant understanding that didn't need to be named to be real. Back home that evening, Mark had left a note on the kitchen counter. "Dinner's in the fridge. Got called into an unexpected evening meeting. Don't wait up." I stood in the kitchen holding the cool slip of paper for a long moment before placing it flat on the granite surface. Dinner with Sophie was cheerful, a small island of normalcy. Her infectious smile was a balm, pure and untainted by the bewildering complexities of adult life. After bedtime stories and tucking her snugly into bed, I found myself alone again in the cavernous living room, aimlessly flipping through old photos on my phone. There was one of her and Mark, taken on a vacation to the Rockies 5 years ago. They were laughing in the picture, arms slung casually around each other, hiking boots caked with mud, mountains majestic in the background. She tried to remember what that version of them, of her, felt like. It seemed like a story she'd read in a book long ago, not something she had actually lived. She thought about texting him, just a simple, "I miss us," but her fingers hovered over the screen, then retreated. Instead, she found herself drafting a text to Ethan. Sometimes I feel like I'm trying to fix something that doesn't even want to be fixed." She stared at the message, her thumb poised over the send button. After a long, contemplative pause, she deleted it. Weeks had passed. Her sessions with Ethan remained meticulously professional. He never once said or did anything that crossed a line, anything that could be misconstrued. But the way he listened, the profound empathy in his eyes, the way he remembered the smallest, most insignificant things she mentioned, like her irrational fear of thunderstorms or her favorite long-forgotten childhood story, made her feel deeply, completely known. And being truly known, she was beginning to realize, felt dangerously, intoxicatingly close to being loved. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Lena arrived at his office flustered and uncharacteristically late. Sophie's preschool had a minor flooding emergency. Her own car stubbornly refused to start, and she'd finally arrived 10 minutes past her appointment time. Her hair damp from the downpour, her nerves frayed. Ethan greeted her with his usual unshakable calm. "Rough day?" she managed, trying to catch her breath. "Take your time, Lena," he said, his voice soothing. "You're here now." And somehow, those simple, compassionate words opened the floodgates. She spoke more freely, more openly than ever before about her unfulfilled dreams, how she once yearned to be a writer, how she had imagined a different kind of life for herself, not necessarily richer or more glamorous, but simply more alive. He listened with that same quiet, unwavering attention, occasionally interjecting with questions that gently pulled her deeper into her own narrative. Then he said something that struck her with the force of a revelation. "You still can be that person, Lena, the one you think you lost. She's not gone. She's just waiting." That night, she dreamed of vibrant jasmine flowers pushing their way resiliently through tiny cracks in cold, unforgiving concrete. At home, things with Mark continued to drift, an aimless, silent current pulling them further apart. They weren't actively fighting. That, at least, would have required some form of engagement, some spark of emotion. They were simply coexisting. Two ships passing in the night, sharing a physical space without truly sharing themselves. One evening, summoning her courage, she attempted to talk to him again. "Do you think we're happy, Mark?" she asked quietly, after Sophie had been tucked into bed. He looked up from his laptop, genuinely surprised. "What kind of question is that, Lena?" "I mean it," she persisted. "Do you think we're really okay?" He sighed, closing his laptop with a decisive click. "We're not fighting, are we? We're both providing for Sophie, giving her a stable home. Isn't that enough?" "Providing and living aren't the same thing, Mark." He stood up, a defensive edge to his voice. "Look, Lena, I don't know what you want from me. I'm doing my best." "I want you to see me," she said, her voice barely a whisper, a plea from the depths of her soul. He didn't reply. Later that night, she stood by Sophie's bed, watching her daughter sleep peacefully, a small dimpled hand curled near her cheek, a faint, innocent smile playing on her lips. Lena felt the crushing weight of everything, her unspoken grief, her unfulfilled longings, her confusing emotions, settle heavily in her chest. The following week, Lena told Ethan the unvarnished truth. "I'm not just here to talk anymore," she said quietly, the words hanging in the still air of his office. "I mean, I am, but I think I look forward to this, to seeing you, more than I should." He didn't look surprised. He paused, his expression thoughtful, then spoke gently, his voice a calm anchor. "Lena, these sessions are designed to be a safe, supportive space. It's not uncommon for strong feelings, even feelings of attachment or affection, to develop in therapy, especially when you've been so open, so vulnerable. That connection, that sense of being understood, matters a great deal. She felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. I know it's not appropriate. I'm not asking for anything or expecting. I know, he said, cutting in gently, his gaze kind. But it's important that we understand where this is coming from. You're searching for closeness, for support, for that feeling of being truly seen and valued. All of that is profoundly human, Lena. She nodded, a tight knot forming in her throat. I just don't want to feel ashamed of it, she added softly. You don't have to be. There is no judgment here. We'll navigate this together with honesty and care. And somehow, those words, that unwavering acceptance, made her feel safer, more understood than anything else could have. Still, something in her perspective had irrevocably shifted. The emotional intimacy she felt with Ethan, no matter how carefully and ethically they both navigated its boundaries, was undeniably real. And it forced her to confront a truth she had been studiously avoiding for far too long. She was deeply, achingly lonely. And that loneliness wasn't because of Ethan, not because of therapy. It was because her marriage, the sanctuary she had once cherished, had become a cold, dark house with all the lights turned off. One weekend, Mark's parents came to visit. There was polite, surface-level conversation, shared meals where the silence felt heavier than the food, Sophie running around excitedly, blissfully unaware, showering her grandparents with affection. Everything looked perfectly normal, perfectly fine from the outside. But that night, as Lena cleared dishes in the kitchen, Mark said, his voice flat, "Well, they think everything's perfect between us. I'm glad we're at least keeping up appearances." She turned to him, the dish towel clutched in her hand. "Are you, Mark? Are you truly glad that it's just appearances?" He looked genuinely confused. "What do you mean by that?" "Never mind," she said, turning back to the sink. She felt like a ghost in her own life, an invisible presence in a play where everyone else knew their lines. After her next session with Ethan, Lena didn't go straight home. She drove to a quiet, secluded park overlooking the city and sat under a sprawling oak tree, her hands resting loosely in her lap. She thought about everything: Sophie's infectious laughter, Mark's increasing distance, Ethan's unwavering kindness, her own restless, searching heart. She wasn't entirely sure what she wanted, not yet, but she knew with a newfound certainty what she didn't want anymore. To keep pretending that this profound loneliness was just a phase, something that would magically pass if she just stayed quiet, stayed patient, long enough. The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the horizon in hues of apricot and rose. Her phone buzzed in her purse, a message from Ethan. "Just checking in, Lena. You seemed a little quiet at the end of our session today. Hope you're okay." Lena stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, with a deep breath, she typed her reply. "Not entirely sure if I'm okay, Ethan, but I think I'm finally ready to find out what I truly need." She hit send. The journey wasn't over. The choices ahead weren't simple. Far from it. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was truly, authentically beginning. The days that followed were quiet, not outwardly different in their routines, but internally, Lena felt as though her entire compass had fundamentally shifted. There was still a pervasive uncertainty, still that relentless tug-of-war between the comfort of the familiar and the terrifying allure of an unknown truth. But alongside it, there was also a strange, burgeoning sense of strength, a resilience that hadn't been there before. She had begun asking herself harder, more profound questions, not just about her marriage or her complicated feelings for Ethan, but about who she was, independent of all the roles she so dutifully played: wife, mother, employee. One night, after tucking Sophie into bed with her favorite story, Lena stood by the large picture window in her living room, watching the distant city lights of Denver twinkle like fallen stars. The street below was a ribbon of moving car headlights and the occasional flicker of neon signs from downtown. She could hear the soft, rhythmic hum of traffic, the distant bark of a neighborhood dog, the myriad sounds of a world moving inexorably forward, even when hers felt suspended in an agonizing pause. She thought about the vibrant, hopeful version of herself that once dreamed of writing novels, of traveling to exotic, far-flung places, of engaging in late-night conversations filled with laughter and intellectual sparring, and sharing morning coffee with someone who truly saw her, someone who made her laugh until her sides ached. She hadn't lost that version of herself entirely. She had just buried her, slowly, layer by layer, under a mountain of diapers, deadlines, and disappointments. A quiet, unshakable resolve settled in her chest. She needed to make a change, a real, tangible change, not just for herself, but for the little girl sleeping peacefully down the hall, the perceptive child who watched her mother with careful, observant eyes. Children, she knew, learn about love not just from how they are treated, but from how they witness their parents treating each other, and just as importantly, how their parents treat themselves. At her next session with Ethan, she said it simply, her voice clear and calm. "I've made a decision." He didn't speak right away. He waited, his attentive silence giving her the space she needed. "I'm going to talk to Mark," she continued. "Really talk. About everything." Ethan nodded slowly, his expression unreadable but supportive. "That sounds like a significant step forward, Lena." "I'm scared," she admitted, the vulnerability raw in her voice. "What if it just breaks everything, irreparably? And what if it saves something?" he countered gently. "Or frees something within you, regardless of the outcome with Mark." She managed a faint, watery smile. "You always seem to know the right thing to say." "I try to listen to what's truly being said," he replied, and the warmth in his eyes, the genuine empathy, didn't need to be named or analyzed. She thought about how deeply, profoundly, she appreciated him. Not because of blurred lines or wishful romantic emotions, but because he had, with unwavering patience and skill, given her the safe space to become herself again. And maybe, just maybe, that unwavering, respectful support was precisely what she had needed most all along. That evening, after a somewhat strained family dinner, she asked Mark if they could talk, not in passing, not while multitasking between chores and Sophie's demands, but a real, focused conversation. He looked hesitant, lines of fatigue etched around his eyes, but he nodded. They sat across from each other in the living room, the television off, the usual evening distractions set aside. For a long moment, Lena struggled to find the words, the right words. "I know we're both tired, Mark," she began, her voice soft but steady. "And maybe neither of us has been perfect, far from it. But I feel like we've been living in the same house for years now, but not really seeing each other, not connecting." Mark looked down at his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I've felt it too, Lena. I guess I didn't know what to do about it. Or maybe I was too afraid to try." I went to therapy, she said gently, the admission feeling like a weight lifted. I didn't tell you because at first it felt intensely personal, like something I needed to do just for me, to sort out my own head. He looked up then, surprised, but not angry, not defensive. Is that why you've seemed different lately? More present, somehow? Maybe, she acknowledged. I've started asking myself what kind of life I truly want. For me, for Sophie, and for us, Mark, if there's still an us to be found. He didn't respond immediately, the silence stretching between them, not uncomfortable, but filled with unspoken thoughts. Finally, he said, his voice heavy with a weariness that mirrored her own, I think I forgot how to be a husband, Lena. I got so caught up in work, in responsibilities, in just getting through the day. I just assumed we were okay because we weren't actively fighting. But you're right, we're not okay. It wasn't a dramatic Hollywood-style emotional breakthrough. There were no sudden tears, no grand, sweeping promises of immediate change. But it was, undeniably, the first truly honest, vulnerable conversation they'd had in a very long time. I'm willing to try, he said quietly, meeting her gaze. If you still are. Lena didn't answer right away. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she hadn't allowed herself to in years. She saw a man who was tired, flawed, imperfect but not malicious, just lost, much like she had been. I'm not promising I can go back to how things were, Mark, she said, her voice gaining a new firmness. I don't even know if I want to, but maybe we can learn how to be something new, together. He nodded slowly, a flicker of something akin to hope in his eyes. Can we start with dinner tomorrow night? Just the two of us, like we used to? She smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes. Let's try. Over the next few weeks, they began, tentatively, painstakingly, to rebuild. Not perfectly and certainly not quickly. There were awkward silences, small, fumbling misunderstandings, moments of profound doubt that threatened to derail their fragile progress. But there were also long walks after dinner, shared stories that had been buried for years, unexpected bursts of laughter over Sophie's bedtime antics, and a slowly re-emerging tenderness. They started seeing a couples therapist, someone entirely separate from Ethan. It was Lena's idea, and Mark agreed without protest, a sign in itself. Their joint sessions weren't always easy. They were often challenging, emotionally draining. But they were real. One night, after a particularly emotional and difficult couples session, Lena sat alone in her study and drafted a message to Ethan. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time before she began to type. Ethan, I wanted to thank you. Thank you for helping me remember who I am, for listening without judgment, for offering kindness when I didn't even know how much I needed it. She paused, then added, a sense of quiet resolution settling within her. I think I'm ready to end our individual sessions now. I need to try and build something new, something real, without leaning on you as a primary support. His reply came a little while later, thoughtful and characteristically supportive. Lena, it has been a genuine privilege to walk part of your journey with you. You are stronger and more resilient than you often give yourself credit for. I will be cheering for you, always. She stared at the message for a long time, her heart full, her eyes misty. Then, with a sense of closure, she deleted their message thread, not out of regret or a desire to erase the past, but because it was, definitively, time to step forward into her own strength. Weeks turned into months. Lena and Mark had their inevitable ups and downs. Some days were good, filled with a newfound ease and connection. Others were quiet, tinged with the old, familiar hesitations. But there was movement, progress, and that mattered more than anything. They planned a weekend trip to the mountains, just the three of them. Sophie was thrilled beyond words. Lena packed a new journal, its pages still blank, waiting to be filled. On the first morning of their trip, while Sophie happily collected colorful autumn leaves nearby, Lena and Mark sat on a rustic wooden bench, watching the sun rise over the majestic snow-capped peaks. "You know, Lena," Mark said, turning to her, his gaze soft, "you seem lighter." "I feel lighter," she admitted, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "It's not always easy, this rebuilding, but I think I'm starting to like myself again." He reached for her hand then, his touch tentative, hesitant, but undeniably genuine. She let him take it. It wasn't the dramatic start of a perfect fairy tale love story, but it was a beginning, a real, imperfect, hopeful beginning. Months later, Lena stood nervously at a small open mic night at a local Denver coffee house. She read a poem from her new journal, her voice a little shaky at first, then growing steady, confident. It was about a woman who had lived for years behind invisible walls, until one day, with courage and help, she remembered how to open a door. When she finished, the small, appreciative crowd clapped warmly. She smiled, a radiant, heartfelt smile, as she stepped off the makeshift stage. Mark was in the audience, holding a sleepy Sophie on his lap. Both of them were smiling back at her. Later, as they walked home together under a canopy of stars, Sophie skipping happily ahead, Mark turned to her. "You were amazing tonight, Lena." She laughed, a light, joyful sound. "You say that every time." "Because it's true every time." And for once, for the very first time in a long, long while, she truly believed him. Lena never forgot Ethan Reed, not because of unfulfilled longing or unresolved, complicated emotions, but because he had, with profound skill and compassion, helped her find the courage to change, the strength to reclaim her own voice. He had been a mirror reflecting her forgotten potential, a patient voice in the chaos, a steady light when everything else in her world felt impenetrably dark. But she didn't need that external light anymore, not in the same way, because she had, at long last, found her own. She still wrote in her journal, but now the entries were filled with hope, with reflections on growth, on learning, on the beauty of imperfect beginnings and the quiet, deeply satisfying victories of the everyday. She still had hard days. She still doubted herself at times, but now she also trusted herself more. Sophie once asked her, a child's innocent curiosity shining in her eyes, "Mommy, are you happy?" And Lena bent down, brushing a stray strand of hair from her daughter's forehead, and said, with a gentle, knowing smile, "I'm learning to be, sweetheart." And that, she was coming to understand, was perhaps the very best, most authentic kind of happy. Lena's journey is such a powerful and relatable exploration of self-discovery within the complexities of a long-term relationship. It reminds us that sometimes feeling lost is the first step towards finding a new, more authentic path. Her courage to seek help, to confront painful truths, and to redefine her own happiness, even amidst uncertainty, is truly inspiring. This story beautifully illustrates that healing isn't always about grand gestures, but often about the quiet internal shifts, learning to see ourselves, perhaps for the first time, with kindness and compassion. And from that place of self-acceptance, new beginnings, even in familiar landscapes, become possible. The most profound transformations often start with the simple, brave decision to learn how to be happy with who we are becoming. What did Lena's story stir in you? Do you believe it's possible to rediscover oneself and reshape a relationship that has drifted? Share your reflections in the comments. Your voice is a valued part of our Inner Compass community. Thank you for joining us today. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up. Share it with someone who might find solace or inspiration in Lena's journey. And be sure to subscribe for more stories that navigate the beautiful and sometimes challenging crossroads of life. Until next time, may you navigate your own path with courage and always be kind to yourself along the way.